it's hard to see it as a bullish sign because this is one of those narratives that we outside had gotten into. But you can read this exactly the opposite. You can say, wow, things are going great.
AI expert James Douma is actually quite bullish on the latest full self-driving version. He also thinks that Tesla could upgrade hardware 3 eventually. This was surprising to me. So let's dive in.
They could decide to make a version of hardware 4 that was retrofittable. I mean, it's mainly a silicon change. When I got to see, I saw Green the Only posted some photos, and I looked at those and I pulled some chip numbers off because I was really curious about what we can learn about what's going on. The FSD sock itself is changed. It's a bigger package, and there's twice as many DRAM chips, and they've gone from a relatively power efficient low speed DRAM to like the fastest DRAM that you can get in a cost effective thing, and they've doubled the memory width. So my back of the napkin on this is they've increased the memory bandwidth by 6.5 times, and this significantly increases the power draw that the module needs.
I am really surprised to hear that James thinks you could actually still upgrade hardware 3 to possibly hardware 4. I mean, look at this screenshot. This, I think, is the new unit, and this should be the old one. How are you going to put this into a slot like this? Everything is different, even like how it's mounted. Everything is different. These all connections are different where the ports are. Everything is slightly different. And then if we dig deeper and we go to notateslaapp.com, the new hardware supposedly has 12 camera connectors, but the old hardware only had 9 cameras in total. So you would also have to put actual cameras into the old vehicle somehow and then have them wired and everything. And possibly maybe would you also need to adjust the angles of these other cameras? It just seems like it would be a gigantic challenge to do that.
So I think that, probably the dominant reason why it's not retrofittable is they decided to go to a much faster memory architecture, which caused the power envelope to go up, and the amount of power that you can deliver in the existing vehicle just isn't enough for the architecture that they wanted. They had a target spec. If they decided that they really wanted to make a retrofittable version, they could spin another version of the silicon, change the memory footprint, and get kind of an intermediate thing. So it's not like the ship has sailed on hardware 4 and that there's no possibility for a hardware 3 improvement. They could do another one. It wouldn't be that big a deal. They've got millions of cars out there. Like there's like 2 million cars that could bear upgrading. And that might be something that makes sense for them. I was kind of surprised that they decided not to have hardware 4 be upgradable. On the other hand, if you really think hardware 3 is good enough, you don't need to upgrade it. It's expensive, it's complicated, it's inconvenient for the users. The better thing is just deliver software that works on hardware 3. I mean, that's the win-win.
Yeah, it came as a surprise to me as well that Tesla chose not to make hardware 3 upgradable, but it sort of makes sense if you believe that the hardware is already good enough to provide full self-driving eventually. And then of course Tesla saves a lot of money not having to upgrade all of these computers. But it would have been nice if Tesla just let owners to upgrade themselves if they wanted to get a faster computer. That would have been nice, certainly. And Tesla could have just said, hey, look, we are not going to pay for it because we believe that hardware 3 is going to be good enough for full self-driving. But if you want to upgrade and if you just want to have the newest thing, you can. That would have been nice, although I don't think many people would have gone did that because that is not cheap. So it doesn't really matter really that Tesla did not give that option, but it would have been nice for some consumers. I think full self-driving is going to be sold on the newest hardware. So in this case, it would be hardware 4 or hardware 5 or even a later version later on instead of hardware 3, for example, because you will have more compute power, obviously, but eventually that could trickle down to hardware 3 as well. With a lot more data, you can simplify everything needed for full self-driving, and you can still have software that will do everything quite well, even if it has a computer that is not as good because the code is so much better and so much more efficient now. So in a way, I think actually hardware 4 will still help hardware 3 quite a bit, possibly. For example, imagine a maze. And I tell you, hey, look, you can run and go solve the maze. It will take you a while to run through the whole maze. Imagine that you have to do this in person. It's not just a drawing, but you're like in a forest or something. And you can run. But then there's another person that maybe is less fortunate than you and cannot run and can barely walk maybe. If you solve the maze and then give the instructions to that person that can barely walk, and that person that could barely walk would be hardware 3 in this case, that person will then be able to actually solve the maze quicker than without these instructions from you. In other words, hardware 4 is going to help hardware 3, is my opinion.
The silicon's going to keep getting better. It just is. The hardware is just going to get better. We're going to know more about it. So it's going to get cheaper and cheaper to make better and better platforms. So just like everything else, why wouldn't you make a better version 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road? Because you can do that and save money at the same time. So that was inevitably going to happen. The presumption that they would make it backward compatible, I think for me was a component of a big component of that was thinking, well, more compute is always useful. I mean, you can always produce a better experience with more compute.
Oh yeah, I actually just upgraded my computer and everything is just so much faster and it's smooth and my life just got a little bit better, actually quite a lot better. It's like my mood through the day is just a little bit better now. If you have an old computer and you have the money to upgrade, I highly recommend to do so.
But there's this other sort of component of it that I wasn't thinking about, which is like, once you've got enough hardware in there to deliver what you need to deliver for the audience that you want to go to, then anything else that you do it's just gravy. It's not necessarily creating value for that. So maybe that's where we are.
Translation, maybe buy Tesla stock.
And, as I mentioned at the start of that, if they decided that they really needed a hardware upgrade, they could probably quadruple and stay inside the same power envelope if they decide they want to do that.
So you're thinking if the 2 million or so of existing vehicles needed an upgrade, they could make a separate.
They could build a separate container. They could do, you can repackage the silicon, and instead of having 2 banks of that memory, you go to 1 bank. Instead of doubling the memory width, you could put half of it in, and you could significantly bring the power envelope down. So I think they're going to, hardware 4 is, just based on the memory bandwidth, it would be a 6.5x speed up if that was the only thing going on. But if they're taking advantage of any architectural improvements on top of that, it's probably 10, might be 20. So it seemed like they decided that for the next one, if we're going to do another hardware design, let's just go long. Let's go for like overwhelming, huge amounts of compute power.
So it sounds more like if Tesla needed to upgrade hardware 3, they would make hardware 3.7 instead of 4.0, because that hardware maybe would be power constrained and therefore it would not be as good as hardware 4 possibly, but still quite a bit better than the old hardware 3. And that sort of makes sense, but I think Tesla would wait until full self-driving is actually solved on the latest hardware version, and then if they really can't make it work on these older hardware versions, only then Tesla would do this, I think.
If they did a separate retrofittable, hardware 4 type of, thing, but it had less, let's say, memory and less power draw, would they have to have 2 separate neural nets they deployed basically on these 2 versions of
But they already
hardware?
do different versions for different vehicles. So
But that does sound like a headache, doesn't it?
it's not as big a headache as being unable to fulfill the promise you made to 2 million buyers, right?
That's true. Yeah.
James does have a very good point here. Also, right now, we don't really want Tesla to have multiple neural nets because that takes a lot of engineering resources away from Tesla. it's better to have Tesla work on just one version of full self-driving, because then we will solve full self-driving faster. But once you actually solve it and it's out there and hardware is good enough and it works, then I guess it doesn't hurt that much to dedicate some resources and take some great engineers away from improving the software to making sure that the old cars can run this software as well, but it will have to be a slightly different kind of software that will be simpler to run because the computers are not going to be as powerful.
I thought you were going to lead off with FSD 11, which is I actually seeing FSD v11 on the car now. It's a really significant improvement. I've been really happy with it.
I am so not happy with version 11 of full self-driving because I don't have it yet. It's probably because I'm in Canada. I'm always like the last one to get all of the major updates.
I see really solid progress toward delivering, robotaxi capable level of FSD on the existing vehicles on hardware 3. And so, it gives me confidence that they're going to get there on hardware 3. And so that initial interpretation that, probably no need hardware 4. Like this is, it's hard to see it as a bullish sign because this is one of those narratives that we outside had gotten into, like hardware 4, we'll go from 3 to 4 to 5, all the cars will get upgraded. And it didn't go that way. And now it's like, our external take on it is, oh, is something wrong? But you can read this exactly the opposite. You can say, wow, things are going great. No more hardware upgrades are ever going to be needed. They're super confident. And that's why with hardware 4, they're just going someplace else because hardware 3 is done.
That seems to be a pretty good way of thinking about it. And hopefully that turns out to be true, but we'll find out. Personally, as long as we solve full self-driving before the end of 2030, I will be happy.
Right now, the easiest way to make progress is you get a faster computer and you just make the neural networks bigger and you train on more data or whatever the deal is. But long term, like as the technique continues to get better, like delivering FSD, delivering a full robotaxi FSD, the requirements are going to go down, right? Like as it gets mature, like hardware 3 will be plenty. That I had said before that, the previous GPU that they had, which is like 5 or 10x less capable than hardware 3, like at some point FSD will run on that and it will work, right? Like whether there will be enough of those cars to make it worthwhile and they'll still be on the road and that kind of stuff. Those are all open questions. But as the technology gets good, the hardware requirements go down.
The main question here would be, how tolerant will we as a society be of accidents? Right now, we have so many vehicle accidents. People die every single year. Many people get injured. Maybe if full self-driving software and hardware gets really good, maybe we will be so intolerant of anyone dying in accidents that we will mandate the newest version of hardware and software to be used, and the older software maybe and hardware, no, will not be allowed, which then would force Tesla to upgrade all of the old computers. Something to think about. And this is an important message to all Tesla stock investors. My name is Matt Posius. Like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.